Hi everyone and welcome back to the FPL Family YouTube channel. I'm Sam and today we are going to be taking another deep dive into a Premier League side. This time we're going to the Toon and having a little look at Newcastle United. Now before we start looking at the underlying stats, it is important to point out that there are huge legal battles going on around the football club right now. They have been rumbling on for 18 months but now we are in the legal stages of that in terms of the ownership of the club. Now the ownership of the club being as unsettled as it is right now can only be a bad thing for the Newcastle United players and also for us as FPL managers if we want to invest in the Toon. Mostly because, of course, whilst the legal battles are happening, nobody's coming into the club. There's no new signings. There's no development of the squad. There's no development in terms of the management and investment in the future of the club. And that is not great. So the quicker that these legal battles can be sorted and the ownership can be kind of finalised, the quicker that Newcastle will then be able to move on and potentially become better FPL assets to us. Leaving that aside then, when we have a little look at the underlying stats from last season, they don't look great from a defensive point of view. Just 7 clean sheets for Newcastle last season. That was almost the worst in the division. Only West Brom and Sheffield United, who both got relegated, kept less clean sheets than Newcastle did last season. They also conceded 62 goals last season. Again, only 4 clubs managing to concede more goals than them. Sheffield United and West Brom again, but also Southampton and Crystal Palace this time. You do not want to be in a position where you're conceding that many goals because that means your forwards have got to work twice as hard to score twice as many goals to make up for the mistakes that you're making at the back. So defensive mistakes proving to be a huge problem at Newcastle United. Again, they also conceded 3 own goals last season now. Second worst in the league, behind only West Ham and Arsenal who conceded 4. You can't score that many own goals. 3 own goals is just too many. And as a result of that, again, that's having a negative impact on not only the totals and the underlying stats, but also on the kind of feeling and the performances from the players. There just seems to be some defensive weakness going on at Newcastle United. Having said that, when we have a look at big chances created, they conceded just 73, which actually was the 8th best in the league. So whilst they were allowing the opposition to have the majority of the ball, whilst they were allowing them to have the majority of the possession in their half, whilst they were allowing them to score 62 goals, they actually weren't affording them that many big chances. And so maybe something was going right. And actually maybe with a bit more development in this squad and a bit more certainty, the goalkeeping and the defence situation could be something that potentially could be worth investing in from an FPL perspective. But the fixtures at the beginning of the season aren't great, particularly from a defensive point of view. And therefore, we would be, I think, placing Newcastle very much in the let's watch how they get on in the early part of the season. And if they start to show improvements defensively, maybe. But on the stats from last season, I'm not going to touch the Newcastle defence with a barge pole just yet. When we have a little look at them in terms of the touches that they had, the stats are really bad. So bottom for touches in the opponent's half with 8,094 in total. When we have a little look at Manchester City, who are at the top for touches in the opponent's half, they had 9,891 more touches in the opponent's half than Newcastle did. Well over double. Again, you're not getting in the right positions. If you're not in the right positions, you can't score goals, and that's weakening Newcastle as an FPL asset. In terms of touches in the final third, then they managed just 4,451. Manchester City, Liverpool and Manchester United all had at least double that. When we have a little look at penalty area touches, it wasn't quite as bad. They weren't bottom, they were second from bottom, West Brom having less. And they managed just 594 penalty area touches. So the underlying stats aren't looking great. When we have a little look at them moving forward then, these are the goals and the attempts on goal that we saw from Newcastle last season. 46 goals managed to score last season. That's the 8th lowest in the division. Managing also just 36 assists. Again, 7th lowest in the division. So not ideal. They were getting attempts away. The green ones show the attempts on target and the yellow ones attempts on goal generally that weren't on target. So these are some of the fewest heat maps that you will see across the Premier League this season in terms of the number of goals scored and in terms of the number of attempts, because Newcastle just weren't getting in the right positions or putting in enough attempts on goal. And we can see some of them actually coming from inside their own half, which is unsurprising really, given the stats I've just read out about positions and possession inside the opponent's half. Now these heat maps come from our friends at Fantasy Football Scout, so thanks to them for letting us use their graphics and their members area to produce these videos. If you aren't already a Fantasy Football Scout member, there's 20% off at the moment, and there is a link in the description below to help me get that. And we have a little look at them in terms of goals. This graph here rather shows attempts on goal, total attempts on goal, and we can see Callum Wilson at the top there with 49 attempts. When we have a little look at kind of attempts and goals across the board for Newcastle, they had 129 attempts from set pieces. Only 5 teams had more than them, so they actually did use their attempts from set pieces quite well. And therefore, when we're thinking about investment in Newcastle, if you are wanting to invest in Newcastle, then the set piece takers might be the best options, the likes of Shelvey, for example. Potentially that's where the most attempts are going to come from. They had just 161 corners though. That was the 3rd lowest in the league, but actually their conversion rate was good, 6th best in the league. So whilst they didn't get a lot of corners, what they did with the ones they did have was much better than some of the other Premier League sides, again suggesting that maybe it's the set piece takers that we want to invest in from a Newcastle point of view. And we have a little look at goals scored then. Wilson comes top for goals with 12, followed by Willock, who got 8, and Almiron and Joe Linton with 4 each. Now, of course, with Willock, it's important to note that he is an Arsenal player. He was on loan at Newcastle last season and therefore will not be part of the Newcastle squad going into the 21-22 season as it stands at the moment. Newcastle, I think, would have liked to have kept him, but Arsenal saying that Willock is definitely part of their plans. So I'm not expecting Willock to go back to Newcastle for the new season, but of course if he does, he will probably be one of the better assets to own from a Newcastle perspective. When we have a little look at assists, Wilson was top with 6. Again, really poor numbers from a Newcastle perspective. St Max and Richie both managed 5 each, and Fraser managing 4. We aren't just not seeing the level of attacking threat that we would want to. And again, that goes back to what I said earlier about possession in the opponent's half. You need more possession in the opponent's half, in the final third, and of course in the penalty box, if you are going to see these attempts mount to something, and if we are going to see goals and assists come off the back of them. And when we have a little look at the set piece threat then, as I mentioned before, Shelvey's probably the best option. He was top for set piece threat with 19 attempts, 3 of them coming from his head. Lascelles was next with 14 attempts, 11 from his head, and Joe Linton next with 10 attempts and 6 of them from his head. So we are seeing some decent underlying stats there for Shelvey and Lascelles at least, but with Lascelles, you're not really likely to get clean sheets based on the evidence from last season. And therefore, that's a concern in terms of investing in him, because if you look at other defenders who have attacking threat alongside their ability to keep clean sheets, they offer a lot more in the way of value for money, particularly when we look at teams like Brighton, who we've already had a deep dive on. And some of the other bigger squads that we're going to come to have a little look at shortly in the deep dive videos. In particular, I'm thinking about clubs like Watford. For me, it's difficult to invest in them. Now, when we have a little look at one of the key assets from Newcastle for this season, St Max. Now, St Max, of course, has been reclassified this year as a forward in the game. Now, this came as a big surprise to me because St Max, in my mind, is anything but a forward. He is definitely a midfielder, but at 6.5 million, he is going to put himself in that kind of Ivan Toney bracket where you're going to start thinking about having somebody at that point, either in your second or your third forward spot. Now, when we have a little look at his stats from last season, he had 19 starts for Newcastle. In that time, he scored 3 goals and managed the 5 assists that I mentioned before. Those underlying stats aren't great. And when we have a little look at his expected stats, in terms of expected goals, just 2.57, expected assists, just 2.03, and expected goal involvement, just 4.06. So these are not the underlying stats of somebody that we're really going to want to invest in from a forward perspective. He did manage a touch every 1.9 minutes. And so from that perspective, he is integral and vital to the Newcastle team. But from an FPL perspective, I'm not sure. 63 penalty area touches, 30 attempts on goal, and 15 of those from inside the box. We should see better stats from a number of other players in and around this price point going forward. Their other key stats are obviously kind of players like Callum Wilson and like Almiron, and we can see those 3 sitting top of the points totals for Newcastle from last season. But those points totals are incredibly low, and for most sides, when you bring up the points totals from last season, we'll see significantly more FPL points than Newcastle are offering. Wilson, Almiron, St Max probably going to be the ones that you're going to target if you're going to go Newcastle. You've then got the difficulties in terms of the goalkeepers, because of course they rotated a lot last season with Darlow and Dubravka. When we have a little look lower down this list, Joe Linton doesn't get enough game time in terms of starts for me to want to invest in. And then from a defensive point of view, well, we have a few. We have Lascelles here, again, coming in this season at 4.5 million. But as I've already mentioned, there are a number of 4.5 million defenders out there this season who look like they've got potential for more clean sheets than Newcastle does. Jamal Lewis, again, should have been and looked like he was going to be a great FPL option last time out, but wasn't starting enough goals towards the back end of the season. Fraser made that move alongside Callum Wilson, but he really never got going, although he did manage those 4 assists last season, but we saw him get a lot more than that when he was a Bournemouth player in the Premier League in seasons gone by. And as we look lower down, it becomes really difficult to pick anyone from a Newcastle perspective, because look at those FPL points from last season, very, very low. So it's really difficult to invest in Newcastle going into the 21-22 season. But the positive thing is they are going to be incredibly low owned. And therefore, if we get somebody that comes into the season on a bit of a purple patch, if we get someone like St Max or Almiron or Callum Wilson or Ryan Fraser or one of the defenders that actually has a really good start to the season, then it'll be easy to make the move because they're nice cheap options. And you'll be making the move ahead of the field in terms of, you know, being able to get ahead of the game and get on that purple patch quickly. So for me, watch Newcastle in these early game weeks of the season. Let's watch what happens in this legal battle in terms of the ownership and whether they actually invest in the club over the summer months. Keep an eye on them, keep them on the back burner. But for me, I wouldn't be putting anyone into my squad for that first 15 for the first few game weeks of the season. That's it on Newcastle. Have a think about what you think about Newcastle United, and if there is anybody that you're thinking about investing. If you are kind of considering it, drop me a note in the comments below and let me know what you think. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and if you haven't already done so, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you for another deep dive very soon.